move. 2 words. That's all it took. The handcuffs clicked around her wrists before she could say another word. Standing in the cold Arizona rain, soaked through her jacket, Madison Carter didn't scream, didn't fight, didn't beg. She just looked at Officer Mitchell with calm eyes and said quietly, "You're going to want to call your supervisor." He laughed. "Mistake." If you're watching this right now, drop a comment and tell me what city you're from. I want to see how far this story travels. And make sure you subscribe and stay with me until the very end, because what happens next will change the way you think about power, respect, and what it truly means to stand behind the people you love. Rain started around 4 in the afternoon, not the gentle kind of rain that makes the desert smell like wet sage and red clay. This was the hard, mean kind, the kind that came sideways across the flat highway outside Phoenix. The kind that hammered against asphalt and turned the road into something that looked like a river moving sideways. The kind of rain that made most people pull off the road, find a gas station, get a coffee, and wait it out. Madison Carter didn't pull off. She had ridden in worse. She downshifted, leaned slightly into the curve where the highway bent south, and kept going. Ducati Panigale V4 hummed under her like something alive, like an animal that trusted her completely, that responded to the lightest pressure of her knees, the smallest shift of her weight, the most subtle adjustment of her grip. She had been riding motorcycles since she was 14 years old, and there wasn't a road in Arizona she was afraid of. Father had taught her that. He had put her on a motorcycle before he put her behind the wheel of a car. He said it was because a bike didn't lie to you the way a car did. A car wrapped you in metal and plastic and made you think you were safe when you weren't. A motorcycle told you the truth. It told you exactly how fast you were going, exactly how slick the road was, exactly how close to the edge you were. A motorcycle demanded your full attention, your full respect, every single second. You don't respect the road, Jackson Carter had told her once. The road will remind you why you should. She was 20 years old now, a college graduate. The Ducati had been her father's gift when she walked across that staid, deep red machine that cost more than some people's cars, more than some people's first down payments on a house. She remembered the morning she came downstairs and found him standing in the driveway next to it, arms folded across his chest, streaks in his beard, looking at her with that expression. He had the one that wasn't quite a smile, but held more warmth than most people's biggest grins. Was all he said. She had cried. Not in front of him. She waited until she was inside the garage, sitting on the seat, running her hands over the handlebars. Then she let herself cry, because she knew what that bike meant. It wasn't just a motorcycle. It wasn't just a gift. Way of saying, "I see you. I am proud of you." One of us. The registration was in her bag. The insurance card was in her bag. Her license was in her wallet. Everything was exactly where it was supposed to be, because Madison Carter had been raised to do things correctly. Not because she was afraid of getting in trouble, but because her father had explained many times, in many different ways, that when you live the life they lived, when your last name was known in certain circles, when your father sat at a certain table, when the patch on the back of a jacket meant something that most people only read about in magazines, you did not give anyone a reason to come at you. You kept your registration current. You kept your insurance paid. You kept your license clean. You obeyed every traffic law down to the letter. "We already stand out," Jackson had told her. "Don't give anyone a reason to look twice." She hadn't. Not once in 2 years of riding that Ducati had she been stopped. Until today. The patrol car had been sitting in a turnout on the east side of the highway, parked just far enough in the shadow of an overpass that you almost didn't notice it. Madison noticed it when she was still about a quarter-mile back, not because she was looking for it, but because her father had trained her to see everything. You scan the road, you scan what's beside the road. You know your surroundings before your surroundings become a problem. She clocked it at distance and didn't change anything about the way she was riding. She was doing exactly the speed limit, 65, not 66, not 64, 65. She had her headlight on because her father had told her to always run the headlight, even in daylight, because it made her more visible and there was no reason not to. She passed the patrol car. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the lights came on. She felt a cold thing move through her chest, not fear exactly. More like the recognition of something inconvenient. She checked her speed again out of reflex. She hadn't been speeding. She signaled, moved to the right lane, and began to slow down, pulling off onto the shoulder with smooth, deliberate movements. She had done nothing wrong. She knew she had done nothing wrong. She put down the kickstand and cut the engine. She pulled off her helmet and set it on the tank in front of her. She sat very still with her hands visible, resting on her thighs, waiting. Two officers approached. The one who came to her left was younger, maybe late 20s, brown hair cut close, the kind of face that was still deciding what kind of person it was going to become. His name tag said Brooks. The one who came to her right was the one she noticed first, not because he was bigger or louder, but because of his eyes. His eyes had already decided something before he got within 10 feet of her. His name tag said, "M. Michelle, ma'am," Mitchell said, "and registration." "Of course," Madison said. Voice was quiet, not nervous, not defiant, just quiet. "Registration is in my bag on the right side. My license is in my front jacket pocket." Slowly, he said, "Understood." She moved slowly. She produced her license from her front pocket with 2 fingers, the way you were supposed to. She unzipped the right side of her bag and produced the registration without having to search for it, because she always kept it in the same place, folded once in a small plastic sleeve. She handed both to Mitchell. He looked at her license. He looked at her. He looked at the Ducati. Then he looked at her again. "This your bike?" "Yes, sir." "How long have you had it?" 2 years. "Where'd you get it?" Something moved behind her eyes, but her face stayed still. "My father gave it to me as a graduation gift." Mitchell tilted his head slightly. "Father?" "Yes, sir." "Your father gave you a Ducati Panigale V4. It was not a question. It was a statement delivered in a tone that was meant to communicate something like, "I don't believe you." Something like, "That doesn't make sense to me." Something like, "I've already decided what's happening here, and what you say isn't going to change it." And breathed in once through her nose. "Yes, sir," she said again. He did. Mitchell walked slowly around the motorcycle. He was looking at it the way people look at things they've already decided are wrong, but are searching for the specific detail that proves it. Stood near the rear of the bike, his thumbs in his belt, not saying anything. "Run the plate," Mitchell said to Brooks without looking up. Got on his radio. Madison waited. She did not pull out her phone. She did not fidget. She did not speak unless spoken to. She sat on the Ducati in the rain, helmet on the tank, in front of her, hands resting visible on her thighs, and she waited. It took 4 minutes. 4 minutes during which Officer Mitchell walked around the motorcycle twice, crouched down to look at the VIN plate on the frame. He turned, stood back up, looked at Madison, looked at the bike again, and said nothing. Came back. He spoke quietly, but not quietly enough. "Clean. Registration comes back valid. Insured. Flags." Mitchell nodded. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then he said, "Step off the bike, please." Madison blinked once. Then she swung her leg over and stood beside the Ducati on the wet asphalt, hands visible, posture straight. "Is there a problem, officer?" she asked. "I'd like to ask you a few more questions." "Of course." "Have you had anything to drink today? Any controlled substances?" "No." "Where are you coming from?" "Friend's house, off Camelback Road." "And where are you heading?" "Which is where?" She gave him the address. He wrote it down. He asked her to repeat it. She repeated it. He wrote it down again, though it hadn't changed. She watched him and understood what was happening. He didn't have anything. The plate was clean. The registration was valid. The license was valid. She had done nothing wrong. Ready to let her go. Because letting her go meant admitting he had stopped her for no real reason, and he wasn't built to do that easily. "Officer," she said, keeping her voice level, "may I ask why you stopped me?" "Routine traffic stop." "Was I speeding?" A pause. "No." "Was there something wrong with the motorcycle?" Another pause. "We're still determining that." "Determining what exactly?" "The plate came back clean. Registration is valid. I have a valid license." "I've answered all of your questions." She paused. "What are you still determining?" Mitchell's jaw tightened slightly. Just a little. Just enough for her to see it. "I'm going to need you to step over to the patrol vehicle." "Please step over to the patrol vehicle." "Officer Mitchell." Her voice was still quiet, still controlled. But something had shifted inside it, not anger. Something older and more careful than anger. "I am cooperating fully. I have done nothing wrong. If you have a reason to detain me, I'd like to know what it is." For a moment, Mitchell looked at her with an expression she had seen before. on men who weren't used to being questioned by someone who looked like her, was riding what she was riding, standing in the rain without flinching. I'm going to need to run a more thorough check on the vehicle, he said. Step to the patrol car. She walked to the patrol car. And this is where things went wrong. Because a more thorough check meant time. And time meant standing on the side of a wet highway while a tow truck was quietly dispatched. Something Madison didn't know about yet. Something that was already in motion because Mitchell had made a call on his radio that wasn't about running a plate. It was about securing the vehicle for impound. He had already decided the Ducati was going with him. He had decided before he had a single fact to justify it. Madison stood beside the patrol car in the rain. Her jacket was soaked through. The water was running down the back of her neck. She stood straight and she said nothing. You know, Mitchell said, coming to stand in front of her, that's a very expensive motorcycle for someone your age. She looked at him steadily. My father worked hard. What does your father do? Here it was. The question underneath all the other questions. Question. She saw it in the hypothesis he had been building since the first moment he laid eyes on her. Young woman, expensive bike, red Ducati. Something didn't fit his picture of the world, and when something didn't fit, he filled in the gap with what he expected to find. He's in business, she said. What kind of business? Kind that is none of yours. Mitchell's eyes changed. Ma'am, I need you to turn around and place your hands behind your back. She felt something drop in her stomach, a cold, falling sensation. On what grounds? Turn around and place your hands. Grounds, Officer Mitchell. Obstruction. I have answered every question you asked me. I have cooperated fully. I have not obstructed anything. You're being uncooperative. I am asking you a legal question. That is not obstruction. Cuffs were already in his hands. And he was. And this is what her father had taught her. This exact moment, the moment when everything in your body screams at you to fight, to push back, to prove something. This was the moment when you went very still inside. Because fighting a pair of handcuffs on the side of a highway was not the fight that mattered. The fight that mattered happened later. The fight that mattered happened with documents and recordings and the calm, deliberate pressure of people who knew exactly what they were doing. Please let me make one phone call, she said, to my dad. Reached for her arm. Please, she said, not desperate, pleading, almost gentle. Make this easier on yourself. Let me call my father. Brooks shifted his weight behind her. He glanced at Mitchell. Something in his expression was uncertain, a small, hesitant thing, like a question he didn't know how to ask out loud. He didn't say anything. Mitchell almost smiled. You can make your call at the station, he said. The cuffs clicked, cold metal, tighter than they needed to be. She felt them against her wrist bones and said nothing. She stood in the rain beside the patrol car with her hands behind her back, and she looked out at the highway, at the red Ducati sitting on the shoulder with its engine cold now, and its rain-wet paint catching the gray afternoon light. She thought about her father. She thought about what he had told her the first time he put her on a motorcycle. She had been 14 years old and terrified, and he had stood beside the bike and looked at her and said, "The machine does not know if you're scared. Only you know that. And that means it's your choice what it feels." She wasn't scared now. She was something harder than scared. She was certain that the red Ducati on the shoulder of that wet highway had something Mitchell didn't know about. A small GPS tracker, flush-mounted behind the left side fairing, connected to an app on a specific phone that she knew was sitting in her father's front shirt pocket at this exact moment. She hadn't activated anything. She hadn't pressed a button or sent a text or made a signal of any kind. She didn't need to, because the tracker had a dead man protocol built into it, a feature her father had added after she got the bike. If the Ducati stayed stationary for more than 12 minutes without the engine running during riding hours, the system sent an automatic alert. She had been stopped for 9 minutes when Mitchell put the cuffs on her. She had been in cuffs for 3 minutes before the alert fired. 12 minutes exactly. Somewhere on the other side of Phoenix, in a garage that smelled like motor oil and old leather, and coffee going cold in a paper cup, a phone buzzed once on a workbench. Jackson Carter picked it up. He looked at the screen. His face changed, not in an explosive way, not in the way that movies show you when something dramatic happens. No wide eyes, no sudden motion, no sharp intake of breath. His face changed the way a sky changes before a storm. Slowly, quietly, with total and inevitable certainty. He set down the wrench in his hand. He picked up a different phone, an old one, with a contact list that had no names in it, only numbers. The third one from the top. It rang once. She stopped on the I-17 South, he said. Tracker's been sitting 12 minutes. A voice on the other end said something short. No, Jackson said. Ride slow, we park clean. Nobody touches anything. A pause. Tell them to leave the cuts at home tonight. He ended the call. He reached for his jacket. Back on the highway, Madison heard something she didn't expect. The tow truck. She turned her head and saw it pulling up behind the patrol car, orange lights flashing in the rain. Driver in a yellow vest climbing out of the cab with an air of practiced routine that told her this had been called well before she had done anything remotely justifiable. Why is there a tow truck? She asked. We're securing the vehicle, Mitchell said. Securing it for what? You don't have grounds to impound it. Registration is clean. The plate is clean. I haven't been charged with anything. Maybe evidence. Evidence of what? He didn't answer. She watched the tow truck driver walk toward the Ducati. He was a heavy-set man in his 50s, with the gray beard and reading glasses tucked in his breast pocket. He walked up to the bike and reached for the handlebars, and then something made him stop. He leaned down. He was looking at something on the bike. Something small, something on the frame, just below the left grip, almost hidden, unless you knew to look for it. A small pin, shaped like a skull and two wings. The tow truck driver straightened up slowly. He turned around and walked back toward the officers, and his face had changed in a way that was hard to read, somewhere between professional caution and personal alarm. He said quietly to Mitchell, "Before you do anything else here." He glanced at Madison, then back at Mitchell. "Do you know whose daughter you just put in cuffs?" Mitchell looked at him. "What?" The tow truck driver lowered his voice further. "That pin on the bike. You know what chapter that is?" Mitchell's eyes moved to Madison. She looked back at him without expression. "I asked you to let me call my dad," she said quietly. And then they heard it, not loud at first. More like a vibration something felt in the chest before it was heard by the ears. A low, layered rumble that wasn't thunder, that wasn't traffic, that was something specific and deliberate and organized. Coming from the north, coming from the direction of Phoenix, heard it first. He turned toward the sound. The tow truck driver heard it second. He took 3 steps back from the Ducati and put his hands in his pockets. Mitchell heard it third. And Madison Carter, standing in the rain with her hands cuffed behind her back, closed her eyes for exactly one breath. She exhaled, then she opened them again. "That's my dad," she said. She said it without satisfaction, without anger, without the slightest trace of "I told you so." She said it the same way she would have told you what time it was, because she had always known this was how it was going to end. She had known it from the moment the handcuffs clicked. The sound grew. It filled the highway. It filled the flat desert air around them and bounced off the overpass overhead and came back louder, was still falling. The orange lights of the tow truck still flashed. Ducati still sat on the shoulder. And on the horizon, coming south through the gray afternoon, the first headlights appeared. Then 3, then 10, then more than anyone standing on that highway could easily count. Jackson Carter hadn't called the chapter in anger. He hadn't called them for revenge. He had called them because his daughter was alone on the side of a highway, and she had asked for help, and no one had given it to her. That was enough. Officer Brooks put his hand on the door of the patrol car, not to get in, just to touch something solid. His face had gone to a particular kind of still that meant he was working through something difficult and hadn't finished yet. Mitchell stood in the rain and watched the headlights coming. He was still holding his radio. He had not yet called his supervisor. That right there was his second mistake. Because when your supervisor found out about this later, and the supervisor was going to find out, that much was now guaranteed. The fact that you didn't call first was going to matter. The fact that a girl had asked to make a phone call and you had laughed was going to be on a body camera. The fact that a tow truck had been dispatched before you had a single chargeable offense was going to be in a dispatch log, was already recorded somewhere. That was the thing about doing the wrong thing in the age of cameras and GPS and automatic alert systems built into $60,000 motorcycles. The truth didn't need anyone's help anymore. It kept its own records. The motorcycles were close enough now that you could see the riders' dark shapes in the rain, moving together with the kind of unhurried precision that came from years of riding in formation. Racing. They weren't aggressive. They moved like something inevitable, like weather. At the front of the formation, one rider separated slightly from the rest. He was older than most of them, gray-bearded, broad-shouldered, riding a bike that was older and plainer than the ones behind him, a flat black machine with no chrome except the exhaust, worn smooth in places from years of miles. He pulled to the shoulder 100 feet back from the patrol car. Stopped. He cut the engine. Behind him, one by one, the others did the same. 40 engines, falling silent over 30 seconds. The quiet that followed was more frightening than the sound had been. Jackson Carter took off his helmet. He hung it on the mirror, swung off the bike, and walked forward. He did not look at the officers. He walked straight to his daughter. "Baby," he said. "Hey, Dad." Her voice was steady. "I'm okay." He looked at her face. He looked at her wrists. He looked at the handcuffs. Then he turned and looked at Officer Mitchell for the first time. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to. Mitchell looked at the 40 motorcycles sitting silent on the shoulder. He looked at the 40 riders standing beside them. He looked at the man in front of him who had not raised his voice, had not moved aggressively, had not made a single threatening gesture, and who was more frightening than any of those things would have made him. Mitchell reached for his radio. "Dispatch," he said. "I need a supervisor at my location." The tow truck driver, who had not moved since the motorcycles arrived, quietly climbed back into his cab. He did not unhook the Ducati. He was not going anywhere. Madison stood in the rain, with her hands still cuffed behind her back, and watched her father's face and felt something she had not let herself feel since the moment the metal clicked around her wrists. Safe, not because the danger was gone, but because the right person was now in the room. And the right person in this case wasn't the loudest one. He wasn't the one with the badge or the radio or the uniform. He was the gray-haired man standing quietly in the rain, who had ridden across the desert without being asked, who had not said a threatening word to anyone, who had brought 40 people with him, not to cause a scene but to be witnesses, because witnesses mattered, because cameras mattered, because the truth, once recorded, did not go away. The supervisor's car was still 12 minutes out. 12 minutes. The same number that had started all of this. Madison looked at the Ducati, red and rain-wet and patient on the shoulder, and thought about how her father had given it to her as a symbol of something he believed about her. She looked at the officers who had taken her off that bike and put metal around her wrists, because they had looked at her and decided she couldn't possibly be what she was. She looked at her father, who had crossed the desert in the rain, because a tracker told him she needed him, and who had arrived without anger, without spectacle, without a single word that could be used against him later. She thought, this is what he's been teaching me my whole life. Not the writing, not the registration, not the knowing where to keep your documents. This, the absolute certainty in the middle of an unjust moment that you are who you are, and that who you are does not change because someone in a uniform decided they didn't believe it. Rain kept falling. The 40 engines stayed cold. Jackson Carter stood between his daughter and the officer who had cuffed her, and he had not yet spoken a single word to that officer, and he would not speak until the supervisor arrived, because everything he wanted to say needed a witness. He had learned that lesson a long time ago, and he had spent 20 years making sure his daughter knew it too. The supervisor's name was Lieutenant Gerald Harmon, and he had been on the force for 22 years. He had seen a lot of things in 22 years. He'd seen bar fights and domestic calls and armed standoffs and the slow grinding paperwork of cases that went nowhere. He had seen officers make good decisions under pressure and bad decisions under none at all. He had developed over 2 decades a particular instinct for walking into a situation and knowing within the first 30 seconds exactly how badly someone had already screwed it up. He pulled onto the shoulder and sat in his car for a moment before getting out. He counted the motorcycles. He stopped counting at 35. He got out of his car. The first thing he noticed was the girl, young, blonde, standing beside the patrol car with her hands behind her back, jacket soaked through, straight as a flagpole. Not crying, not yelling, not doing any of the things people in handcuffs usually did when they were scared or guilty or both. Just standing there like she was waiting for a bus. Calm in a way that wasn't natural, the kind of calm that was trained into a person, that came from someone spending years teaching them what to do when everything went sideways. The second thing he noticed was the man standing about 8 feet from Mitchell. He was not doing anything. That was the part that got Harmon's attention more than anything else. In his experience, men who showed up to a scene like this with 40 motorcycles behind them and a daughter in handcuffs in front of them were doing something, yelling, moving, making their presence known in a way that could be documented, contained, responded to. This man was just standing there with his arms at his sides and his eyes on Mitchell, and the absolute stillness of him was the loudest thing on that highway. Harmon walked toward Mitchell first. "Talk to me," he said, low and quick. Mitchell straightened. "Sir, I conducted a traffic stop on a suspected stolen vehicle." "Suspected based on what?" A pause that was a half second too long. "Appeared inconsistent with the vehicle." Harmon looked at him. "What does that mean?" "The bike is a Ducati Panigale V4. High-end. The rider is a 20-year-old female." "Did the plate come back clean?" "Yes, sir, but..."
Did the registration come back valid?
"Yes, sir." "Was she speeding?" "No, sir." "Did she have a valid license?" "Yes, sir." "Did she cooperate?" Mitchell's jaw worked for a moment. She became, "That's not what I asked you." Harmon's voice hadn't risen at all. That was the thing about Gerald Harmon. He never raised his voice. He had learned that a quiet voice in a loud situation was like a cold wind. It cut through everything. "Did she cooperate with your initial instructions?" Time was 3 full seconds. "Yes," Mitchell said. Harmon turned and looked at Madison. Then he looked at the tow truck, still sitting behind the patrol car with its orange lights going. Then he looked at the 40 motorcycles on the shoulder. Then he looked back at Mitchell. "Why is there a tow truck here?" Mitchell opened his mouth. "Think carefully," Harmon said. Mitchell closed his mouth. Harmon walked over to Madison. He stopped about 2 feet away and looked at her the way a man looks at a situation he is about to have to explain to a lot of people for a very long time. He said. "I'm Lieutenant Harmon. I apologize for the delay in getting here." "Okay," Madison said. "Can you walk me through what happened from your perspective?" She did. She walked him through it in the same steady, sequential way her father had taught her to do everything. Start at the beginning. Give the facts. Don't editorialize. Don't leave anything out. She told him about being stopped. She told him about producing her license and registration immediately. She told him about the clean plate return. She told him about being asked to step off the bike. She told him about the questions that followed and the tow truck that appeared without explanation, and the moment she asked to call her father and was denied. Harmon listened without interrupting. When she finished, he said, "You asked to make a phone call." "Yes." "And you were denied?" "They told me I could make a call at the station." Harmon looked at Mitchell. Mitchell was looking at a point somewhere over Harmon's left shoulder. "Why is she still in handcuffs?" Harmon asked. "Not to anyone in particular." Nobody answered. "Remove them," he said. Brooks moved first. He came around behind Madison with his key, and the cuffs came off, and Madison brought her hands around to the front and rubbed her wrists slowly, not making a show of it, just managing the ache where the metal had been. She did not look at Mitchell. She looked at her father. Madison Carter had not moved. He was still standing in the same spot, 8 feet from Mitchell, arms at his sides. When he saw his daughter's hands come free, something moved through his face, barely visible, a small shift around the eyes, like a very slight pressure releasing. He nodded once. She nodded back. That was their whole conversation in that moment. 2 nods across 8 feet of wet asphalt, but it said everything that needed to be said. "I'm okay. I knew you'd come. You got here in time." Harmon turned to face Jackson Carter. For a moment, the 2 men just looked at each other. 2 men of a certain age who had both spent a long time reading other people and being read in return, had 22 years on the force. Jackson Carter had 30 years of something that didn't have an official title, but amounted to the same thing: reading rooms, reading people, knowing where the exit was before you walk through the door. "Sir," Harmon said, "I appreciate you keeping this peaceful. Law-abiding people." "Lieutenant," Jackson said. His voice was quiet, rougher than Madison's, worn down around the edges by years and weather and a life lived at a certain volume. "We came because my daughter needed help. We'll leave the same way we came." "Understands." Harmon paused. "I want to be direct with you. What I'm seeing here doesn't look right. I'm going to need to review the body camera footage before I make any official statements. But I want you to know that this is being taken seriously." Jackson looked at him for a moment, not testing him, just reading him, the way he read everything carefully without rushing. "I appreciate that," Jackson said. "That's all I'm asking." He turned back toward Mitchell, and the way he moved told everyone watching that whatever conversation was about to happen between those two men was going to be the kind that Mitchell was not going to enjoy. Mitchell had been standing in the same spot for the last 4 minutes. He was doing the thing people did when they knew they had made a mistake, but hadn't yet figured out how to get to the side of it, the slightly rigid posture, the eyes moving without settling anywhere, the jaw tight, the hands not quite knowing where to go, had moved about 6 feet to the right. That 6 feet of distance was a statement. He was separating himself from Mitchell, not loudly, not obviously, but anyone who was paying attention could see it, the slight angle of his body turning away. The way he was looking toward the motorcycles, instead of toward his partner, careful stillness of a man who was deciding in real time which side of a thing he wanted to be standing on, came to stand directly in front of Mitchell, about 3 inches shorter than Mitchell. And it didn't matter at all. Body camera has been running since you initiated the stop, Harmon said. Yes, sir. The dash camera in your vehicle has also been running. Yes, sir. You dispatched a tow truck, sir. I had reason to believe. What reason, Mitchell? Harmon's voice dropped half a register. What specific articulable reason did you have to call for impound before you had a single charge to support it? Mitchell looked at the ground for a moment, then back up. Vehicle appeared inconsistent. You already said that. Harmon took 1 step closer. The plate was clean. The registration was valid. The license was valid. Rider cooperated with every instruction. What was inconsistent? Silence stretched. The rider's age, Mitchell said finally, and the cost of the vehicle. There it was, said out loud, with Harmon's body camera rolling, and he was, with 40 witnesses standing on the shoulder of the highway, standing 6 feet away, and not coming closer. Harmon looked at him for a very long 3 seconds. Go sit in your vehicle, he said. Mitchell blinked. Vehicle now. Mitchell walked to the patrol car and got in. The door closed. Through the windshield, his profile was visible, rigid, staring forward, doing the math on what had just happened and what was coming next. Harmon turned to Brooks. Brooks was already looking at him. You want to tell me something? Harmon said. Brooks looked at the ground, then back up. His face was doing something complicated, the face of a young man who had made a passive choice and was now understanding what passive choices cost. I should have said something earlier, Brooks said, when the plate came back clean. When she asked about her rights, he stopped. I knew it wasn't adding up, and I didn't say anything. Harmon studied him. You'll put that in your report. All of it. Yes, sir. Harmon turned away. He walked toward Madison and her father, who had moved together. Now she was standing slightly behind Jackson's right shoulder, not hiding behind him, close. The way people stand when they're near someone who makes them feel like the ground is solid again. Carter, Harmon said, again, I apologize. You should never have been in handcuffs. You did everything right, and the situation should not have escalated the way it did. Madison looked at him. Thank you for saying that. I'm going to need a statement from you. Not tonight. Whenever you're ready. And I'd encourage you, He stopped himself. I'd encourage you to document the marks on your wrists. She looked down at her wrists. There were red lines where the cuffs had been. They'd fade by morning, but right now they were visible and clear and exact. I already planned to, she said. Harmon almost smiled. Just almost. I can see your father raised you right, he said. He looked at Jackson, then he extended his hand. Sir. Jackson looked at the hand, then he shook it. 1 pump. You handle your people, Lieutenant. That's all I need. I intend to, Harmon said. He went back to his car. The first moment in almost 40 minutes, the highway was quiet in a way that felt different from the tension quiet of before. It was the quiet of something having passed, the quiet of a situation that had gone to the very edge of a bad outcome, and then, by a combination of one man's restraint and another man's decency, pulled back. The tow truck driver had already started his engine. He was leaving without the Ducati. Jackson watched the tow truck pull back onto the highway. Then he walked over to the Ducati, still standing on its kickstand exactly where Madison had left it, rain-wet, patient, untouched. He put his hand on the seat. Then he looked at his daughter. Yeah, she said. I'm good. You sure? Because Denny can put the bike in his pickup. She looked at him. I'm riding home. He looked at her for a moment. Then he nodded. That barely their smile again. Okay. She went to the bike and checked it over a quick circuit turns. The way he'd taught her, the way she did every time she remounted after a stop. Mirrors, controls. Nothing had been touched. She swung her leg over. She put the key in. The Ducati started with that deep, precise, beautiful sound that never got old. She looked out at the 40 riders on the shoulder and felt something she didn't have words. For gratitude wasn't quite right. Because gratitude implied surprise, and she wasn't surprised. She had always known, in some deep and certain place, that if she ever needed them, they would come. What she felt was more like recognition, like looking at something and knowing it was exactly what it was supposed to be. One of the riders, a big man with a red beard, somewhere in his mid-40s, named, she knew, Carl Briggs, who had been riding with her father since before she was born, raised 2 fingers off his handlebar in a small, quiet salute. She raised 2 fingers back. Jackson came alongside her on his bike. He said, "Ready, we ride slow. We always ride slow, Dad." He pulled out first. She fell in behind him. The 4T bikes started their engines, one by one, till the sound was a full, deep, layered thing that filled the air and covered the highway and probably rattled windows for a quarter mile in every direction. They pulled out onto the highway in the same formation they had arrived, unhurried, deliberate, organized. No one looked at the patrol car as they passed it. No one gave Mitchell a glance, not a single rider. That was a choice, a collective, silent, coordinated choice made by 40 people. Understood that the most powerful thing you could do to a man who had used his power badly was to refuse to acknowledge that his power had ever frightened you. They passed him like he wasn't there. And that was worse than any angry word any of them could have said. Inside the patrol car, Mitchell sat with his hands on the steering wheel and watched them go. The body camera was still running. His hands were still on the wheel. The dispatch log still showed the tow truck call at a timestamp that was going to be very difficult to explain. Return, showing clean, was still in the system with a timestamp. The registration return was still in the system with a timestamp. And the recording from his own body camera showed a young woman producing her documents calmly, answering every question politely, asking to make a phone call, and being denied. All of it was already recorded. All of it was already permanent. He sat in the patrol car on the empty shoulder and understood, for the first time, the true shape of what he had done. Not just the mistake of the stop itself that was bad enough, but the chain of decisions after it. The tow truck, the cuffs, the denial of the phone call. Every single one of those decisions had been recorded by technology he had not been thinking about in the moment he made them, captured in precise timestamps in audio and video, and every single one of them was going to be reviewed by people whose job it was to find exactly the thing he had done. Not a bad man, not in the way movies made bad men. He was something more ordinary, and in some ways more dangerous, a man who had allowed an assumption to become a certainty before he had a single fact to support it, and had then made a series of decisions to defend that certainty rather than examine it. He picked up his radio. He had a lot of calls to make. Madison rode through the rain with her father 2 bikes ahead of her and 39 bikes behind her. And she thought about the past 40 minutes the way her father had taught her to process difficult things, not emotionally yet, that came later, in private but sequentially. At the beginning, name each thing that happened, stand it, then decide what it taught you. She had been stopped for being who she was on a bike that didn't match someone else's idea of who she should be. She had been cuffed for asking a question. She had been impounded or nearly impounded based on an assumption that had been disproven before it was ever acted on. All of it, she had not lost control, not once, for a second. She had asked for 1 phone call, that was all. 1 phone call, which they had denied her out to be entirely unnecessary because her father's technology had already made the call for her before she asked. She almost laughed at that. Almost. The rain had started to ease up. The highway was clearing ahead of them, the clouds thinning at the western edge where the sun was getting low. The desert was doing that thing it did sometimes. In the late afternoon, after rain turning every color up, making the red of the earth redder, the gray of the asphalt grayer, the distance sharper and more real. She leaned slightly into a curve, and the Ducati followed her exactly, the way it always did, the way it does when it knows you completely. She thought about what her father had said to her years ago. She was 16, and some kid at school had said something cruel to her about her family, about her father's world, about what it meant to grow up with his last name. She had come home furious, that teenage fury that is all heat and no direction, and she had sat at the kitchen table and told him what the kid had said, and she had expected something anger on her behalf, or dismissal, or some speech about rising above it. Instead, Jackson Carter had sat down across from her, folded his hands on the table, and said, "Ernst, what did you do?" She said. I walked away. He had been quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Good. That's the hardest thing there is. People think fighting back is the hard thing. It's not. Fighting back is easy. Walking away when you're right and someone else is wrong, that's the thing that takes everything you've got." She had not fully understood it then. She understood it now. She had been right today, and she had walked it, and it had taken everything she had. And the truth, the registration, the timestamps, the body camera, all of it had done the fighting for her without her having to throw a single punch. The formation took an exit off the highway. As they got closer to the city, riders began to peel off in ones and twos, heading to their own homes, their own garages, their own lives, the lives they had interrupted. The moment Jackson Carter made a phone call, nobody made a big deal of leaving. They simply went the same way they had come. She was. By the time Madison and her father pulled into the neighborhood where she had grown up, it was just the two of them. They pulled into the driveway. The garage door opened. They rode in and cut the engines, and the sudden silence after 40 minutes of engine noise was like stepping into a different world. Jackson got off his bike. He came around to where Madison was still sitting on the Ducati, not quite ready to get off. Not because she was afraid to, because she was sitting with something. "Hey," he said, "come here." She got off the bike. He put his arms around her, and she let herself be held, which she almost never did, which she had been trained by her own nature and his example not to need in front of anyone. But they were in the garage, and the door was closing behind them, and the rain was on the roof, and it was just them. She held on for exactly as long as she needed. Then she stepped back and looked at him. "How fast did you call them?" she said, "before I put my jacket on." She laughed, a small, real, tired laugh. "You were already on the way before I even realized the tow truck was there. Tracker fired at 12 minutes. He shrugged. "You know I set that protocol." "No." She looked at him. "How did you know something was wrong and not just a gas stop or whatever?" "Because you don't stop on the highway," he said simply. "You stop at exits. You stop at stations. The tracker puts you on the shoulder of the I-17 with the engine cold. There's only one reason you stop like that on the I-17. He looked at her wrists. "Let me see." She held them out. The red lines were still there. He looked at them without expression, but something moved behind his eyes, the particular kind of anger that fathers feel when someone has hurt their child, the kind that doesn't show on the surface, because it's been pushed somewhere deep and covered over with control. But that doesn't go away. That just sits there, very still, waiting to be dealt with correctly. "I'm going to take pictures," he said. "I know. Before they fade, Dad. I know. I already planned to." She paused. "Harmon already told me to." Jackson looked at her. "You liked him. I trusted him," she said. "There's a difference." "What's the difference?" She thought about it. "Liking him would mean I trust him because I want to. Trusting him means I believe he'll do what he said he's going to do. I trust him. Tomorrow I'll see." Jackson looked at his daughter. He had raised her by himself since she was 7 years old. Her mother had left not dramatically, not in anger, just quietly and completely, the way some people did when they found that the life they had chosen wasn't the life they could live. She had sent cards on birthdays for a few years. Then even those stopped. And Jackson Carter had raised this girl, this complicated, fierce, controlled, careful, brilliant girl, on his own. In the world he lived in, with the people he knew, by the values he held, teaching her everything he knew about riding and respect and what it meant to stand for something. She had just stood for it today. On the side of a wet highway in the rain, in handcuffs, alone she had stood for everything he had ever tried to teach her. He didn't say any of that. He just said, "I'm proud of you." She looked at him. "I know," she said. He went to the workbench and found the old Polaroid camera he kept there for exactly this kind of documentation. Not because he was paranoid, but because he was experienced, and experienced people understood that the evidence you gathered in the first hours was always better than the evidence you tried to gather later. He came back and photographed her wrists from 3 angles in good light, and he set the camera down. "So," he said, "what do you want to do?" She looked at him. "What are my options? You could let Harmon handle it. See what they find in the footage. See what they do with Mitchell. And if they do nothing, then you have the photographs, the timestamps from the tracker. You have the dispatch log showing the tow truck was called before any charge was filed. 41 witnesses." He paused. "And you have me. What's the other option?" "Attorney. Before Harmon's review is finished, get someone sitting with all of that evidence before anyone has a chance to explain it away." For a moment. "Both," she said. He raised his eyebrows slightly. "Let Harmon do his process. Give him the time he asked for. Want a consultation with an attorney tomorrow morning? Before Harmon calls us. I want someone reviewing my rights before we respond to anything officially." Jackson Carter looked at his daughter for a long moment. Then he sat down on the workbench stool and crossed his arms and looked at her with that expression, the one that wasn't quite a smile, but held more warmth than most people's biggest grins. He said, "I paid for a law degree, expecting you to work in an office somewhere. I minored in law," she said. "I majored in business." "Close enough. It's really not." "Close enough," he said again. And this time the thing that wasn't quite a smile became something closer to one. She went inside to change out of her wet jacket. Jackson sat in the garage and listened to the rain on the roof and thought about Officer Mitchell sitting in a patrol car on the shoulder of the I-17 with his body camera footage and his dispatch log and his timestamps and the conversation with Harmon that was now permanently on record. He thought about the 40 men who had come when he called, who had come without being told why, who had ridden through the rain because someone they cared about needed them to be present, who had parked and turned off their engines and stood silently while a girl's father walked past them to find his daughter. He thought about the tow truck driver who had seen the pin and understood immediately what it meant and had gone very still and very quiet. He thought about Lieutenant Harmon, who had walked into a situation and read it correctly in 30 seconds and handled it with the kind of direct, quiet authority that Jackson Carter respected above almost everything else in another person. And he thought about Madison, 20 years old, soaking wet in handcuffs on the side of a highway, never once losing herself. Your character is revealed when someone treats you unfairly. He had told her that when she was 14. He had told her other things too, about the road, about the bike, about how to read a room and what to do with your hands when someone got in your face, and why the most dangerous thing you could do was let your emotions make your decisions. She had remembered all of it, every single word. He heard the water running inside. She was in the shower, washing off the rain and the adrenaline and the long turns. Controlled exhausting work of staying calm in the middle of something unjust. He picked up his phone. He had 3 missed calls from chapter members checking in. He had a text from Carl Briggs that just said, "She held her head up the whole time." He put the phone face down on the workbench. Outside, the rain had almost stopped. The highway would be clear by morning. And somewhere in a supervisor's office, a body camera file was being pulled up on a computer screen, and the timestamps were being looked at, and a lieutenant named Harmon was sitting with a cup of coffee, gone cold, and watching the footage with the expression of a man who already knows what he's going to find, but needs to see it anyway. He was going to see Mitchell laughing when Madison asked to call her father, going to see the tow truck dispatched 20 minutes before any justifiable charge, see a young woman standing in the rain with her hands visible, answering every question, remaining calm through everything, and being cuffed for asking a legal question. He was going to see all of it. And when he did, Lieutenant Gerald Harmon, 22 years on the force, was going to make a phone call of his own, not to Mitchell, to his captain. Because what he had seen on that highway tonight was not a gray area, a judgment call. It was not a situation where reasonable people could look at the footage and disagree about what had happened. And clear situations required clear responses. Garage light hummed. Jackson Carter sat with his arms crossed and his eyes closed and waited for his daughter to come back downstairs. The real work would begin. The attorney's name was Patricia Voss, and she had been doing civil rights law in Arizona for 19 years. She was not the kind of attorney who had a big office with framed diplomas arranged to impress you. She had one diploma on one wall, and it was crooked, and she had never bothered to straighten it because she was always too busy actually working to care about what the office looked like. She had a desk covered in files and two chairs across from it, and a coffee maker that ran all day. And when Madison and Jackson Carter walked in at 8:45 the next morning, she was already on her second cup and had already read the initial incident report that a contact inside had quietly made available to her before 7 a.m. She looked up when they came in. She looked at Madison's wrists first. Red lines had faded some overnight, but were still visible thin, precise marks that told a specific story about how tight the cuffs had been relative to the size of the wrists wearing them. "Sit down," Voss said, not unkindly, just directly, the way people were direct when they had a lot to do and valued other people's time as much as their own. "I've read the incident report. I want to hear it from you." Madison sat down and told it again, the same way she had told it on the highway to Harmon, the same sequential, factual, unemotional account. Listened, with a yellow legal pad in front of her, and wrote things down, and occasionally she asked a question not to test Madison, to clarify a specific detail, a specific timestamp, a specific word that had been used. When Madison was done, Voss put her pen down and looked at her for a moment. "The tow truck," she said. "You said it arrived approximately 20 minutes after the stop was initiated, closer to 18, maybe 19, and you had not been charged with anything at that point. The plate had come back clean." "Yes, I heard the radio call. The officers heard it at the same time. Clean plate, valid registration, no flags." And Mitchell continued the stop after that. "He had me step off the bike, asking about where I got it, who bought it, what my father did." She wrote something down. Then she tapped the pen twice on the pad. "Tell me exactly what you said when he asked what your father does." Madison looked at her steadily. "I said he was in business." "He asked what kind." "I said the kind that was none of his." Stopped writing and looked at her. "Those exact words?" "Yes. And that's when he cuffed you. He said I was being obstructive. Then he told me to turn around." Voss sat back in her chair and looked at the ceiling for exactly 3 seconds. Then she looked back at Madison. "You understand what you gave him?" Madison nodded slowly. "I handed him the justification. Not legally, it wasn't obstruction, not even close. But in the moment, it gave him something to put in his report." "Exactly." Voss pointed at her. "That's important that you understand that. Not because you were wrong to say it. You had every right to say it. Because the story is going to be from his side that you became uncooperative and he responded. The footage will contradict that. The timestamps will contradict that. But it's going to be the narrative he tries to build." Jackson, who had not said a word since they sat down, said, "Let him try to build it." She looked at him. "That's my intention, Mr. Carter." She paused. "I want to be clear about something before we go further. Strength of what we have here is significant. The tow truck dispatch timestamp alone, before any charge, before any escalation, before anything that could justify impound, that's not a gray area. That's a decision that was made before the stop produced anything actionable, which means the stop itself was pretextual." "Pretextual," Jackson said, "meaning he didn't stop her for what he said he stopped her for. Meaning he observed a young woman on an expensive motorcycle and decided before he had a single fact that something was wrong. And then he conducted a stop not to investigate a specific violation, but to find confirmation of an assumption he had already made." She paused. "That is textbook pretextual stop. And the tow truck call proves it, because you don't call for impound before you have a charge unless you've already decided the outcome of the stop before the stop is over." Quiet for a moment. Madison looked at the legal pad Voss had been making, at the words pretextual and tow truck, timestamp and wrists photographs, and the small circled notation next to Mitchell's name that she couldn't quite read upside down, but that looked significant. "What do you need from me?" Madison asked. "I need the photographs of your wrists, timestamped. I need a written statement from you, in your own words, in the exact sequence of events. I need Jackson's statement about the tracker alert, the exact time it fired, the exact time he made the call to the chapter, the exact time you arrived at the scene." She looked at Jackson. "Do you have the data from the tracking system?" "Logged," he said, stamped to the second. "I can pull the full report. I need that today." She turned back to Madison. "I'm also going to need the names of anyone who was present on that highway, who is willing to make a statement." Jackson looked at her. I have 40 names. Voss picked up her pen again. Good. I'll need all 40. She said it the way you said something when it was exactly what you expected and exactly what you needed, with a kind of professional satisfaction that was the closest Patricia Voss ever got to smiling before 10 in the morning. They were in her office for 2 hours. By the time they left, Madison had a folder under her arm, not a thin one, and a court date that didn't exist yet, but that Voss had told her with complete certainty was coming, and the name of the departmental oversight board that was going to receive a formal complaint before close of business that day. They walked to the parking lot. Madison's Ducati was in the garage at home. She had come with her father in his truck because he had insisted and she had let him, because some arguments weren't worth having when the person making them was doing it out of love. They got in the truck. Jackson started the engine but didn't pull out immediately. He sat for a moment with his hands on the wheel, looking out through the windshield. "It's good," he said. "She's very good. She already had the report before we got there. I noticed." He turned to look at his daughter. "You trust her?" Madison thought about the distinction she had made last night, liking versus trusting. As he was. She thought about the way Voss had looked at her wrists first when they walked in. She thought about the yellow legal pad and the pen that never stopped moving, and the 3 seconds of ceiling staring that was actually 3 seconds of extremely fast thinking. "Yeah," she said. "I trust her." Jackson nodded. He pulled out of the parking lot and called at 11:17. Madison was at the kitchen table with her laptop and the written statement she had been working on for 2 hours when her phone rang. She looked at the number she had put it in her contacts the night before. She answered on the second ring. "Miss Carter, it's Lieutenant Harmon." "Lieutenant, I've completed my initial review of the body camera footage from both officers." A pause, short but deliberate. "I want you to know that what I saw is consistent with everything you told me at the scene." She kept her voice level. "I appreciate you calling. I also want to tell you, and I'm telling you this as a matter of transparency, not as an official statement, that I have escalated this to my captain as of this morning. Review process for Officer Mitchell's conduct is now at a level above my authority." Something moved through her chest. Not triumph, not satisfaction. Quieter and more complicated than those. "There will likely be a formal investigative process. It may take some time. I want to be honest with you about that. These processes can be slow. I understand. Is there anything you need from me at this point? Any documentation from the department side that would help you?" She looked at her laptop screen, at the email address for Voss's paralegal that she had already entered into a draft. "My attorney will be in contact with you directly," she said. "Her name is Patricia Voss." A very brief pause on the other end. "Then I know Patricia Voss. I thought you might." Another pause. This one had a different texture, the texture of a man recalibrating slightly, adjusting his understanding of the situation based on new information. He said, "Have her reach out. I'll respond promptly. Thank you, Lieutenant. Miss Carter." He stopped for a moment. "For what it's, and I know it may not be worth much, the way you conducted yourself yesterday was exceptional. Circumstances that most people would have found impossible." Looked out the window at the driveway, at the empty space where the Ducati would normally be. "My father raised me," she said simply. "Yes," Harmon said. "He did." He ended the call. She set the phone down on the table and sat with it for a moment. Jackson was in the garage. She could hear him moving around in there, the sound of tools, of drawers opening and closing, the particular rhythm of a man who worked with his hands when he had things to think about. She picked up her phone again and dialed Voss. "Harmon just called," she said when Voss answered. "I expected he would. What did he say?" She relayed the conversation, word for word, the way she had been trained to. Listened without interrupting. When Madison was done, Voss said, "He's escalating faster than I expected." "Is that good?" "It means he watched the footage and it was worse than he anticipated." A pause. "Means it's better than we hoped." Another pause. "I'm going to call him this afternoon. Don't communicate with the department again without talking to me first." "Understood." And Madison. Voss's voice shifted slightly, just slightly, the smallest fraction of degree away from pure professional. "You're doing everything right. Keep doing it." She hung up. Madison put the phone down and finished her written statement. It took another hour. She wrote it 3 times before she was satisfied, not because she was uncertain about the facts, but because the words mattered, and she wanted every word to carry exactly the weight it was supposed to carry. and no more. She had learned that from her father, too. The right word in the right place was more powerful than 10 wrong words used loudly. She was finished. She emailed it to Voss. Then she went to the garage. Jackson was at the workbench. He had pulled apart a carburetor that didn't need pulling apart, which meant he was thinking hard about something and needed something to do with his hands. He looked up when she came in. Harmon escalated to his captain, she said. Jackson set down the part he was holding. How fast? Before he called me. He was quiet for a moment. That means the footage is bad. That's what Voss said. How bad? Bad enough that he didn't want to be holding it alone. She leaned against the workbench, calling him this afternoon. Jackson picked up the part again and turned it in his hand without doing anything to it. Quiet, except for the hum of the fluorescent light and the distant sound of a neighbor's lawnmower 2 houses down. Something I need to tell you, he said. She looked at him. Carl Briggs talked to me this morning. He was at the back of the formation last night. You remember he had that spotter position, hung back about a quarter mile when we came in. I remember. He had his phone out. Jackson set the part down again and turned to look at her directly. He was recording from the moment the formation turned onto the highway. Wide angle. You can see the patrol car, the tow truck, you standing at the vehicle, and Mitchell, the whole time. She felt something go very still inside her. From a quarter mile, he had a mount on his bike. Good camera. Jackson looked at her. You can't hear audio from that distance, but the visual is clear. It shows the tow truck pulling up before Harmon arrived. It shows you standing in cuffs while the tow truck was there. It shows the whole formation arriving, parking and not doing anything threatening. Harmon arriving, talking to Mitchell, and then coming to you. He paused, and it shows the cuffs coming off. Madison was quiet. Wants to know what you want him to do with it, Jackson said. She thought about Voss. She thought about the words, don't communicate with the department without talking to me first. She thought about the dispatch log and the body camera and the 41 witness statements that were now in the process of being collected. She thought about the footage her father was describing, visual confirmation from an independent source, time-stamped by the camera's own internal clock, showing a sequence of events that corroborated everything she had said. To give it to Voss, she said, today, before anything else. Jackson nodded. He picked up his phone. He sent a text with 3 words. Give it to Voss. 3 seconds later, Carl Briggs sent back a thumbs up. Jackson put the phone down. There's something else, he said. She waited. Word got out. He said it carefully, watching her face. Not from anyone in the chapter we don't talk to press. But someone on that highway last night wasn't chapter. Someone was driving by, pulled over, when they saw 40 motorcycles and filmed some of it on their phone. She closed her eyes for exactly 1 breath. It's on social media, he said. Since last night, it doesn't show much. You can see the formation arriving. You can see Harmon's car pulling up. You can't see her face clearly. He paused. But the caption says, a young woman was arrested for riding a Ducati. 40-something thousand views. She opened her eyes. 8,000, she said. As of an hour ago. Could be more now. She looked at the wall, at the pegboard with its neat rows of tools, every one of them in its exact place. Does Voss know I called her 20 minutes ago? She's monitoring it. She said not to comment, not to share it, not to engage with it in any way. She looked at her father and the chapter. Is anyone talking? Nobody's talking. He said it with complete certainty. I told them last night before anyone left. This goes through Voss. Nobody talks to press. Nobody talks to social media. Nobody talks to anyone who isn't family or counsel. Good. There's something I want to ask you, Jackson said. His voice shifted, not softer exactly, but more careful. The voice he used when he was going into territory that mattered more than strategy. How are you doing? Not with the case. With everything. She looked at him. She thought about standing in the rain, about the cold metal, about the way it had felt when the cuffs clicked, and she had to make an internal decision in about half a second about who she was going to be for the next unknown number of minutes. She thought about the feeling of watching the tow truck pull up to her father's gift and not being able to do anything about it. She thought about Mitchell's laugh when she asked to make a phone call, and how that laugh had cost him more than he could have imagined at the time. I'm okay, she said. He looked at her. I'm really okay, she said. I'm angry. I'm going to be angry about it for a while. I didn't break anything in there. She touched her chest. I stayed who I am. Jackson looked at his daughter for a long moment. He said, "You did." The next 48 hours moved fast. Filed the formal complaint with the Departmental Oversight Board at 4:17 p.m. on the same day as the attorney consultation. By 6 p.m., the social media video had crossed 90,000 views, and 3 local news stations had made calls to the Phoenix Police Department's Public Information Office. 8 p.m., the PITO had issued a statement confirming that an officer-involved incident from the previous evening was under internal review. They did not name Mitchell. They did not describe the nature of the review. The statement was 4 sentences long and said almost nothing. Sent Madison a text that night that said, 4 sentences means they're already managing it. Madison read the text and went to bed. She slept better than she expected to. The next morning, a reporter named Diana Chen from the Phoenix Courier called Voss's office at 9 a.m. asking for a statement from Madison Carter. Voss took the call herself and told Chen that her client was cooperating fully with the formal review process and had no comment at this time. Chen, who was good at her job, said, "Can you at least confirm that your client is the daughter of Jackson Carter?" There's a pause on Voss's end of the line. Voss said, "I can confirm that my client is exactly who the incident report says she is. Everything else will come out in the review." She ended the call. The question had been asked, and the question, once asked, had a way of answering itself. By noon, the Courier had published an article. Voss's office had sent a polite but precise letter about accuracy standards before it went to print, and it did not name Madison, and it did not name Jackson. It described the incident in enough detail and referenced the chapter in enough terms that anyone who knew anything about the Phoenix motorcycle community understood exactly what they were reading about. Shared, then shared again, then shared beyond the local audience. By 3 in the afternoon, Madison's phone was getting texts from people she hadn't talked to in 2 years, college friends, old neighbors, professor from her business program who had seen it on her own social media feed, and sent a message that said, "I'm so sorry this happened to you. We're all thinking of you." Madison looked at the messages and didn't respond to any of them, not because she was rude, because Voss had told her not to, because every word she said publicly was a word that could be taken and used and shaped by people she couldn't control, and the only place she wanted her words to go right now was into the formal record where they couldn't be twisted. She called her father instead. "You seeing the article?" she said. "Saw it. The chapter? Nobody's talking. They're all seeing it." "Nobody's talking. Good." She paused. "Dad, people know. People were going to know. I'm not upset about it. I just want to make sure we're handling it right." "You let Voss handle it," he said. "You do what she tells you. You don't get pulled into anything public until the internal review is done, and we know what they found." "Madison," his voice was quiet, "I know it feels like things are moving fast right now. Fast isn't bad. Fast means they know they have a problem, and they're trying to get ahead of it. Thing would be if they went quiet. Quiet means they're burying it, not going quiet. No, they're not." She looked at the article on her laptop screen, at the careful neutral language that somehow told the story anyway, at the comment section, which she had been explicitly told by Voss not to read, and which she was therefore not reading. "I'm going to go for a ride," she said, a pause. "Okay." "I need to think. Take your phone. Call me when you stop." "I know, Dad." She hung up. She went to the garage. She looked at the Ducati, red and patient, and completely, utterly unimpressed by any of the human drama that had taken place around it in the past 24 hours. She checked it over, tires, mirrors, controls. She put her helmet on, the engine, and she rode. Not fast, not aggressively. She took the back roads she knew, the ones that wound through the edges of the desert where the housing developments hadn't reached yet. The road was just road, and the sky was just sky, and the only decision she had to make was which direction to lean. She rode for an hour, maybe a little more, and she thought about nothing that required thinking. That was what riding was for. Not the speed, not the machine, the absence of complexity. The reduction of everything down to road and wind and the exact right pressure of a hand. She stopped at a gas station on the edge of a small town she didn't go to often. She called her father. "Still on 2 wheels?" he said. "Still on 2 wheels. How do you feel?" She thought about it. She said, "I think I know what I want to happen." "What's that?" "I don't want Mitchell fired," she said. A pause. "Okay. I know that's probably not what you expected me to say." It's not. Firing him doesn't fix the thinking, she said. If he leaves, he's just somewhere else, earned, with the same assumptions, making the same decisions. What I want is the training. I want whatever review comes out of this to require retraining. Real retraining, not paperwork. She paused, and I want it on record permanently. So the next young woman he stops, or the next young man, or whoever there's a flag. Jackson was quiet for a long moment. You know Voss is going to tell you to aim higher, he said. I know, and I'll listen to her. But that's what I want. She looked out at the desert. He laughed when I asked to call you. He laughed. That's not a bad cop in the way movies mean it. That's a man who has never been made to think twice about his assumptions. And I want him to think twice. Single day for the rest of his career. Jackson didn't say anything for a moment. Then he said, when you were little, maybe 7, you found a bird in the backyard. Hurt. One wing. You brought it inside in a shoebox and you were furious at me because I told you we couldn't keep it, that we'd have to take it to the wildlife center. She remembered the wing was broken. You cried for 45 minutes. And then you said you were 7. Standing in the kitchen with a shoebox in your arms, you said, but if we fix it, it'll fly again. Flies again, that means it works. He paused. I never told you, but I sat in the truck in the parking lot of that wildlife center, and I thought about that for a long time. She held the phone and didn't say anything. You wanted it to work, he said quietly, not just to be okay, to work. She felt something move through her that was too big to name properly, the particular emotion of being known completely by someone, of having something true about yourself reflected back to you through a memory you had almost forgotten. Yeah, she said. Go ahead and want that, he said, aloud. She stood at the gas station with the desert around her, and the Ducati ticking cool behind her, and the phone warm against her ear, and she breathed in once, slowly. I'm coming home, she said. I'll have coffee ready. She hung up. She stood for another moment, alone, in the particular silence of the Arizona desert in the middle of an afternoon. Then she put on her helmet, swung her leg over the Ducati, and started the engine. She did not know yet that Harmon's captain had already pulled Officer Mitchell off street duty pending investigation. She did not know that Brooks had submitted a voluntary statement to Internal Affairs that morning. A statement which, according to Voss's contact inside the department, was detailed, unsparing, and placed the sequence of events exactly as Madison had described them. She did not know that the tow truck company's dispatch log had been subpoenaed and that the timestamp it contained was going to become the single most important document in the formal complaint. She did not know any of that yet, but she knew the road home. She leaned into the first curve and the Ducati followed her exactly, and she rode. The coffee was ready when she got home. Jackson had made it the way he always made it, when something serious was happening strong enough to stand a spoon in with exactly 1 sugar because Madison took 1 sugar and he took none, and he always remembered without being reminded. It was sitting on the kitchen table next to her laptop when she walked in, still in her jacket, helmet under her arm. She sat down, he sat across from her. Neither of them said anything for a moment. That was one of the things about being raised by Jackson Carter. Silence was not uncomfortable. Silence was just another form of communication, and sometimes it was the most honest one. Her phone rang. Voss. She answered immediately. You somewhere you can talk? Voss said. Yes. I need to tell you some things, and I need you to listen before you react. A pause. Submitted his voluntary statement to Internal Affairs this morning. Madison looked at her father. What did it say? It said everything. His voice was measured, careful, current of something underneath it that wasn't quite excitement, but was adjacent to it, the professional energy of a person who had built a case and watched it become exactly as strong as she believed it was. He confirmed the sequence of events. He confirmed that the plate return came back clean before Mitchell asked you to step off the bike. He confirmed that he heard Mitchell call for the tow truck and that he did not question it at the time, which he states he regrets. He confirmed that you asked to make a phone call and that Mitchell denied it. She paused, and he confirmed something we didn't have before. Madison went still. What? While Mitchell had you at the patrol vehicle, while he was running that second entry check that had no real basis, he made a comment to Brooks, off radio, not on any recording. Another pause, he said, and I'm quoting from Brooks's statement here, girls like that don't ride bikes like that. Somebody gave it to her for a reason, and that reason isn't clean. End quote. The kitchen was very quiet. Jackson had not moved. Set her coffee down slowly. He said that. Wrote it down verbatim in his statement. He said he wrote it in his personal notebook in the patrol car immediately after the incident because he knew he was going to need to report it and he wanted the exact words. Another pause. Daniel Brooks is 26 years old. He's been on the force for 3 years. I think he spent last night deciding what kind of officer he wanted to be. Madison thought about the 6 feet of distance Brooks had put between himself and Mitchell on the highway, about the way he had looked at the ground when Harmon asked him if he had something to say. He made the right decision, she said. He did, and it matters enormously for us. Voss paused. Something else. The tow truck dispatch log has been subpoenaed. Timestamp shows the call went in at 17 minutes and 40 seconds into the stop. Came back clean at 9 minutes and 12 seconds. That's an 8-minute and 28-second gap between confirmed clean status and a call for impound with no charge filed in between, no escalation documented, no radio communication that would explain it. Madison did the math in her head. She didn't need to. She did it anyway. 8 minutes and 28 seconds of him knowing the bike was clean and called for it to be taken anyway. 8 minutes and 28 seconds, Voss confirmed. That's not a judgment call. That's not an officer acting under pressure in an ambiguous situation. That's a documented decision with a documented timestamp and no documented justification. A beat. Ryan Mitchell's attorney called my office an hour ago. Everything stopped. His attorney, Madison said, he retained counsel this morning. They're looking to open a conversation about resolution before the formal investigative hearing. Madison looked across the table at her father. He was watching her face, reading it the way he always read everything carefully, completely, without rushing. What does resolution mean? Madison asked. It means they want to talk before this gets to a public hearing. The tow truck timestamp and Brooks's statement and Carl Briggs's video, which I received this morning and which is extraordinary. By the way, before all of that becomes part of a public record. Voss paused. It means they know what the evidence shows. And what did you tell them? I told them my client would consider any good faith communication through proper channels and that we were not interested in anything that required her to surrender her right to full disclosure of the investigative findings. A pause. Any language. For we're not making a quiet deal that makes this disappear. Madison breathed in slowly through her nose. Good. I want to be clear about your options, Voss said. You can pursue this formally through the Oversight Board's investigative process. Let it go to hearing. Let all of the evidence become public record. Process takes time. It will be more public. It will be harder emotionally. Creates a permanent record that cannot be sealed. She paused. You can enter into a negotiated resolution that likely results in a formal written reprimand, mandatory retraining, and possibly a period of suspension for Mitchell without a public hearing. When does the negotiated resolution do for training policy? Madison asked immediately. Why, not just Mitchell. A pause on Voss's end. Real one, the pause of a person recalibrating. That's not typically part of a negotiated resolution. Can it be? It would be unusual, but can it be? Silence for 3 seconds. Yes, Voss said. It can be if we make it a condition. If they want a conversation about resolution, we can put policy change on the table as a non-negotiable condition of any agreement. Then that's what I want, Madison said. Written policy and mandatory bias training for all traffic stop officers, wide, reviewed annually, and Mitchell's formal reprimand on his permanent record, regardless of any other resolution. Quiet. Then she said, you understand that asking for policy change significantly complicates a negotiated resolution. They may walk away from the table. Then we go to hearing, Madison said. Another pause, longer this time. All right, Voss said. I'll communicate your conditions. She ended the call. Madison set the phone on the table. Jackson was looking at her. Policy change, he said. If I take a quiet settlement, the next girl on an expensive motorcycle gets treated the same way, she said. Maybe worse because Mitchell gets to keep his assumptions and nobody ever challenged them on paper. She looked at her father. That's not good enough. Jackson was quiet for a moment. He looked at his coffee. He looked at the table. Then he looked at her. Grandfather, he said, worked 43 years in a plant outside Tucson. Showed up every day, did the work, never late, never absent. They passed him over for foreman 4 times. Each time they gave it to someone younger, with less experience who had a different last name. He paused. You know what he did? He kept going to work, Madison said. She had heard this story. She had heard it several times. She had never heard it sound quite the way it sounded right now, like it was being told specifically for this moment, for this decision, exact version of the same thing her grandfather had faced in a different decade with different circumstances and the same underlying architecture. He kept going to work, Jackson confirmed. And eventually, the plant manager retired, and a new one came in, and the new one looked at the records and said, why has this man never been given the foreman position? And they gave it to him. And my father said the most important thing wasn't getting the job. He paused. He said the most important thing was that they had to look at the records. Records existed because he never stopped showing up, and everything he did was in writing. Madison looked at her father. Get everything in writing, she said. Everything in writing, he agreed. She picked up her coffee. It had gone slightly cool. She drank it anyway. That afternoon, Voss called back at 3:47. They're willing to talk about policy, she said, in principle. Sat up straighter. What does in principle mean? It means their attorney said, and I'm paraphrasing, that there may be room to discuss departmental standards as part of a broader resolution framework. A pause in attorney language means we don't love it, but we're not walking away from the table. She was. What's the next step? I'm scheduling a meeting with their counsel and a representative from the oversight board for Friday morning. I want you there. I'll be there. Madison. This next part is important. Voss's voice shifted to a register that was slightly more direct, which Madison had already learned meant she needed to hear what was coming with her full attention. When we sit at that table, the other side is going to be looking at you very carefully. They've seen the footage. They've read Brooks's statement. They know the timestamps. What they're trying to assess right now is who you are and what you want. And what they're hoping for on some level is that you're angry enough to make demands they can use to walk away justified. Telling me to stay calm. I'm telling you to be exactly who you were on that highway, Voss said. Because whoever you were on that highway is the reason we're sitting at a table on Friday instead of them issuing a press release about an isolated incident. Madison thought about the rain, the cold metal, the tow truck pulling up to her father's gift. Reynolds laughed. She said again. Thursday came and went. Voss spent it preparing. Madison spent it at Jackson's house. She had moved temporarily, not because she was afraid, but because it was where she thought best, at the kitchen table, with her laptop, looking through the formal timeline. Voss needed, organized by timestamp, building a document that was as precise and clear and unemotional as she could make it. Jackson spent Thursday doing what he always did when he was processing something in the garage, with his hands, with the radio on low, through mechanical problems that had clear solutions because the larger problem didn't yet, and that was hard to sit with. Carl Briggs came by in the afternoon. He sat in the garage with Jackson for 2 hours. They didn't talk about the case much. They talked about bikes, about a run they were planning in October, about Carl's youngest kid who had just gotten into ASU. The kind of conversation that was really about something else, about 2 men who had known each other for 30 years, reminding each other that the world was still mostly itself, that things still mostly worked, that there was still an October coming with a run they were going to take. Madison brought them coffee at some point, and Carl looked at her and said, you know, every one of us would have been there regardless. Do you know that, right? She looked at him. I know, Carl. 40 years of knowing your dad, he said. You're ours too. You understand it's not about the patch. Your family. She looked at his face, this big red-bearded man in his mid-40s who had been a constant presence in her life since she could remember, who had taught her to play poker when she was 15 and threatened every boyfriend she had ever brought around with nothing more than a long, silent stare and an unreadable expression. I know, she said. Thank you, Carl. He nodded once and looked back at his coffee. He was not a man who was comfortable with extended emotional moments. Neither was she. It ran in the family, in whatever way family ran in the world they lived in. Friday morning arrived with clear skies and cold air. Madison dressed carefully. not in a way that was performative or calculated, or not only that. She dressed in a way that was true to herself, which happened to also be strategic, because who she actually was and who she needed to appear to be in that room were the same person, and she was aware of that in a way that felt clean rather than manipulative. Jeans, a structured blazer gray, clean lines, her hair down on her wrists had faded to near invisible, but she knew they were still photographically documented, time-stamped, and in Voss's file. She did not ride the Ducati. She drove her father's truck because Jackson had asked to drop her at Voss's office, and she had let him because some arguments weren't worth having. He pulled up outside Voss's building. He didn't turn off the engine, but he put it in park and looked at her. "You remember what I told you?" he said. "First time I put you on a bike?" She looked at him. "The machine doesn't know if you're scared. Only you know that," he said. "And that means it's your choice what it feels." She looked at her father for a moment, this gray-bearded, broad-shouldered, quiet man who had raised her alone and taught her everything that mattered and shown up on a flat black motorcycle in the rain without being asked. "I love you, Dad," she said. He nodded. "Go!" She got out. The conference room on the 4th floor of Voss's building was not large. It had a table that seated 8, a window that looked out at nothing interesting, a phone in the center of the table that wasn't being used, and 4 people on the other side of it when Madison and Voss walked in. Was a man named Gerald Faber, late 50s, silver-haired, the kind of face that had spent decades arranging itself into expressions of calm reasonableness. Next to him was a woman from the Departmental Oversight Board named Commissioner Andrea Reyes, the look of someone who had been in more of these rooms than she cared to count, and who had an extremely precise idea of what she wanted to get out of this one. Next to Reyes was a man Madison didn't recognize, who turned out to be from the city attorney's office, and he was there to say as little as possible and take notes on everything. Mitchell was not there. That was the first thing Madison noticed. She had expected him to be there. She had prepared herself for the specific discomfort of sitting across a table from the man who had clicked handcuffs around her wrists in the rain. She had thought through how she would handle it, the eye contact, the posture, the voice. She had been ready. He wasn't there. She sat down next to Voss without changing her expression. Had told her, once, that the beginning of a negotiation told you everything you needed to know about what the other side was actually willing to do. The language they used first, who they looked at, what they put on the table before anyone asked. Commissioner Reyes spoke first. "Thank you for coming. I want to begin by stating, on behalf of the Phoenix Police Department, that the incident of last Tuesday evening did not meet the standards we hold ourselves to, and that we take the concerns raised seriously." She paused. "Are here in good faith." Voss let the statement settle for exactly 2 seconds before she responded. "My client appreciates that," she said. "We are also here in good faith. We have a clear picture of the evidence and a clear set of goals for this meeting, and we believe there is a path to a resolution that is meaningful rather than cosmetic." Faber leaned forward slightly. "We'd like to understand what meaningful looks like from your client's perspective." Glanced at Madison. Madison looked at Faber directly. "Accountability on paper," she said. "For Officer Mitchell, specifically a formal written reprimand that becomes a permanent part of his personnel record. Not a verbal counseling, not a note in a file that gets expunged in 2 years." She paused. "And mandatory bias training. For Mitchell alone. Department-wide. For all officers with traffic enforcement duties. Developed by an independent third party. Reviewed annually with compliance documented." The room was quiet. Faber looked at Reyes. The look between them was quick and practiced and said several things simultaneously in the shorthand of people who had been in many rooms together. "The policy change you're describing," Reyes said carefully, "would need to go through a process significantly larger than this meeting." "I understand that," Madison said. "I'm not asking for it to happen in this room. I'm asking for a signed commitment today that the department will initiate that process within 30 days with the specific completion timeline." Looked at her for a moment, with an expression that was hard to read exactly, but contained something that wasn't hostility, something that might have been at its edges, something closer to the thing people felt when they recognized that someone across the table was serious and prepared and not going to be moved. "That's a significant ask," the city attorney said. He had finally spoken. His voice was neutral and slightly tired, the voice of a man who spent his days in rooms like this one. Yes, Madison said. It is, she looked at him. Because what happened to me was significant. And because the evidence in this case is going to become public record, regardless of what happens in this room. And when it does, the question that gets asked is going to be what the department did about it. A quiet settlement that results in a reprimand for one officer with no systemic change is going to look like exactly what it is: containment. And containment is a much harder story to tell than reform. The city attorney looked at Reyes. Reyes looked at Madison. There was a long pause. Then Reyes said, "Give us 10 minutes. She, Faber, and the city attorney stood up and left the room. Madison and Voss sat alone at the table. Voss did not say anything for a moment. Then she leaned slightly toward Madison and said, very quietly, that last part, "Containment versus reform. That wasn't in our prep." "No," Madison said. "Where did it come from?" Madison thought about her grandfather, who had kept showing up and made sure everything was in writing. She thought about her father, who had driven across the desert, not for revenge, but for witnesses. She thought about a bird with a broken wing in a shoebox, and a 7-year-old who wanted it to work, not just to be okay. "It's just true," she said. Voss looked at her for a moment. "Yes," she said, "it is." The 10 minutes became 15. Madison sat in the quiet of the conference room and did not fidget and did not check her phone and did not let her mind spiral into the possible outcomes. She looked it steadily. She waited the way her father had taught her to wait, not passively but attentively, with every part of herself pointed at what came next. They came back at the 14-minute mark. Reyes sat down first. She folded her hands on the table in a way that was deliberate and composed, and told Madison before she said a word that the next sentence was going to matter. "Is prepared to accept the conditions you've outlined," Reyes said. "2 modifications I'd like to discuss." Madison looked at her. "Training program timeline," Reyes said. 30 days to initiate is feasible. We'd like 60 days for the completion timeline for the first round, given the scope." Madison glanced at Voss. Voss gave an almost imperceptible nod. 60 days is acceptable," Madison said. "The second modification." Reyes paused. "Reprimand language. We would like the reprimand to document the procedural violations, specifically the premature tow dispatch, the denial of the phone call request, the lack of articulable basis for continued detention after the clean plate return, rather than characterizing the stop as discriminatory in language." Madison looked at Reyes steadily. "Does the reprimand document all 3 violations explicitly and permanently? And Mitchell cannot request expungement at any point. That condition can be included." "Then yes," Madison said. "That's acceptable." Faber, who had been watching Madison with an expression that had shifted significantly since she had said the word containment, said carefully, "I want to ask, and I'm asking this on the record, I think it matters, is there anything else your client needs from this process to consider this resolved?" Madison looked at him. She had thought about this question. She had thought about it on the road, on the back roads between here and the edge of the desert, with the engine running and the sky wide and the particular clarity that came from motion. She had thought about it sitting at the kitchen table with her laptop and her father's coffee. She had thought about it in the way she thought about things that mattered, carefully, completely, without rushing. "I want Officer Brooks to have his voluntary statement formally noted as a mark of integrity in his record," she said. "Not as a default, as a recognition. He had a choice about who he was going to be, and he made the right one. That should count for something visible." Faber looked at Reyes, looked at Madison. Then Reyes said, "That's the last thing I expected anyone in your position to ask for." "I know," Madison said, "but it's what's fair." The room was quiet for a moment that felt larger than the room. Then Reyes nodded. They spent the next 40 minutes working through the written framework, drafted language on her laptop in real time. The city attorney reviewed it, suggested one modification to phrasing that Voss accepted after a brief discussion. Madison signed nothing that day. Voss had told her in advance that nothing would be signed at a first meeting, that this was a framework session, that the final documents would come within 2 weeks. But when they stood to leave, Reyes extended her hand across the table. Madison shook it, not triumphantly, not coldly, the way her father shook Harmon's hand on the highway, one pump, firm, honest. "I hope," Reyes said quietly, "that the next time your family has an interaction with this department, It goes differently. So do I, Madison said. That's the whole point. She and Voss walked out into the hallway. Voss waited until the elevator doors closed before she turned to look at her. The thing you said about Brooks, she said, I meant it. I know you did. Voss paused. It changed the temperature of the room. It was. You understand that? When you ask for something for the person who helped you, instead of something additional against the person who hurt you, that shifted something. Madison looked at the elevator buttons. My father says the most powerful position you can be in is one where you can destroy something and choose not to. Quiet for a moment. Smart man, she said. Yeah, Madison said. He is. She called him from the parking lot. He answered on the first ring. How'd it go, he said. She stood in the clear morning air outside Voss's building and let herself feel it for a moment, all of it. The past 4 days compressed into one long breath, and the handcuffs, and the formation of bikes coming down the highway, and the garage, and the legal pad, and the conference room, and Reyes's face when she asked for something for Brooks. Policy change, she said, in writing. Mitchell's reprimand is permanent, and Brooks gets a formal commendation. Silence on the other end. Then Jackson Carter said, you asked for something for Brooks. He did the right thing, she said. It should count. Another silence. When he spoke again, his voice was rougher than usual, just slightly, by the fraction that told her he was managing something. Come home, he said. I'll make lunch. She got in the truck. She drove home through the clear Phoenix morning streets that were just streets, no rain, no formations of motorcycles, no flashing lights. And she thought about a small emblem on a red Ducati that a tow truck driver had seen and understood immediately. She thought about 12 minutes, the 12 minutes it had taken for an automatic tracker alert to fire and put her father on his bike and put 40 people on the highway behind him. She thought about the difference between the kind of strength that breaks things and the kind that builds something in their place. She had been raised to understand that difference. And in 4 days, across a rain-soaked highway and a garage and a legal pad and a conference room with a window that looked out at nothing interesting, she had proven that she understood it completely. She turned into the neighborhood where she had grown up. She pulled into the driveway. She could already smell the coffee. The lunch Jackson made was simple. Eggs, toast, coffee for him, and 1 sugar for her, the same way it had always been. They ate at the kitchen table without turning on the television, without looking at phones, without filling the silence with anything that wasn't necessary. That was one of the things about their particular version of family they had learned, over 20 years of just the two of them, that the best meals were the ones where nothing needed to be performed. Madison told him the details between bites, the exact language Reyes had used. 2 modifications. The thing about the reprimand being permanent and non-expungible. The way Faber's expression had changed. Jackson listened and ate and didn't interrupt. When she got to the part about Brooks, he put his fork down. Tell me again what they said when you asked for that, he said. Said it was the last thing she expected anyone in my position to ask for. He looked at his plate for a moment, then he picked up his fork again. Good, he said. You're not going to tell me it was the smart play. It wasn't a play, he said. That's why it worked. Madam, if you'd calculated it, he said, they'd have seen the calculation. People can feel the difference between a tactic and a principle. This has been in those rooms long enough she knows. He picked up his coffee, making a move. You were being who you are. And that's something they couldn't negotiate against. Madison sat with that for a moment. Voss said something similar, she said. Voss is smart. She said the temperature in the room changed. I believe it. He paused. Brooks called me. She looked up. This morning, before your meeting. He got my number from I don't know, someone. One of the guys, probably. Jackson set his cup down. He called to apologize. She didn't say anything. The department, Jackson said. For himself. He said he knew something was wrong when the plate came back clean, and he didn't say anything. And he was sorry. He paused. 26 years old. And his voice was shaking. Madison looked at her father carefully. What did you say to him? Jackson was quiet for a moment. He looked at the table. He looked at his hands, the big work-worn hands that had rebuilt engines and raised a daughter and gripped a flat black motorcycle through Arizona rain. I told him the hardest thing isn't knowing what's right, he said. It's saying it out loud when there's a cost to saying it. I told him he said it. Maybe late, but he said it. He paused. And then I told him to be that person for the rest of his career. Madison felt something move through her chest that was specific and warm and didn't have a clean name. You gave him something, she said. I told him the truth, Jackson said. Auntie was. That's all. She looked at her father across the kitchen table. This man who had ridden through the rain without being asked, who had stood 8 feet from an officer who had wronged his daughter and said nothing, who had given a scared 26-year-old something to stand on when he called to apologize. And she felt the particular kind of love that wasn't soft, that was hard and clear and built from decades of watching someone be exactly who they said they were. She said, good. They finished lunch. That afternoon, while Voss began drafting the formal agreement documents, the story broke wider than any of them had anticipated. It didn't come from the Courier. It didn't come from the social media video, which had by now crossed 300,000 views on its own. It came from an entirely different direction, from a journalist named Marcus Webb at a national publication, who had been covering law enforcement policy for 12 years and who had picked up the Courier article 3 days and had been making calls quietly ever since. Webb's piece went live at 2:17 in the afternoon. It was long, thoroughly sourced. It had the tow truck timestamp, statement, confirmed through official channels. It had Harmon on record confirming that internal review had been escalated to the captain's level. It had a statement from Voss, carefully worded, precisely true, saying exactly what needed to be said and nothing else. It had the video from Carl Briggs, which Voss had authorized for use after Carl agreed, showing 40 motorcycles arriving peacefully in parking, and 40 men standing in the rain doing nothing threatening while a girl's father walked past them to find his daughter. It did not have Madison's name. She had not consented to be named, and Voss had made that condition unambiguous. It had everything else. Madison read it at the kitchen table with her father sitting across from her reading it on his own phone. They read it in silence. When she finished, she set her phone down. He got the timestamp right, she said. He got everything right, Jackson said. Her phone started ringing 3 minutes after the piece went live. Not Voss. Voss texted, Webb's piece just published. Call me in 30 minutes. The calls were from numbers she didn't recognize, which meant press, which meant she declined every one of them without answering. Then a text from her college roommate, Sarah, who lived in Chicago now and who had no connection to any of this, that said, Madison, are you the girl in this article? Please tell me you're okay. Then a text from her business professor, then one from a cousin she hadn't spoken to in a year. Then one from Carl Briggs that said simply, 70 messages in my chapter group in the last 10 minutes. All of them want to know if they can share the article. She texted back, tell them yes, and she called Voss. The calls have started, she said when Voss answered. I know. Don't answer anything from press. Don't comment on the article anywhere public. Share it yourself. A pause. How do you feel? She thought about the question honestly. Like something that was inside me just moved to outside me, she said. Like it was a private thing, and now it isn't. And I'm still figuring out how I feel about that. That's an accurate description of how this process feels, Voss said. It doesn't get more comfortable, but the record that this creates, the public record, is permanent in a way that a negotiated settlement document in a file somewhere isn't. People know what happened. That matters. I know. Harmon is going to issue a statement this afternoon. In response to the article, Voss said, my contact told me an hour ago, I've seen a draft, confirms the review, confirms the escalation to captain level, and states this is new, that the department has entered into good faith dialogue with the affected party regarding systemic policy improvements. Madison went still. They're announcing the policy conversation publicly. In the statement, yes. They're not going to be able to walk it back now, Madison said. Once it's public that they committed to the dialogue, they can't quietly drop it, Voss said. They cannot. A pause between them that held a particular quality, the quality of two people who have been working hard towards something and have just seen it become real in a way that makes backing up impossible. That's not an accident, Madison said. They're announcing it because the article is out and they want to be on the right side of the story before the story gets ahead of them. So, the article did something our meeting couldn't do on its own. The article created a public accountability that makes the private commitment binding, Voss said. That's exactly right. She paused. Marcus Webb has been covering this beat for 12 years. He knew what he was doing. Madison thought about containment versus reform. What she had said in that conference room, the thing that hadn't been in the prep, the thing that had come from somewhere true and had changed the temperature, about how the same logic that applied in that room applied here, that a quiet deal that made something disappear was a far harder story to tell than a public commitment to make something better. She had said it in the room. Webb had printed the same logic in different words 12 hours later. And now the department was standing in front of a microphone, metaphorically, in a press release and saying it themselves. Because there was no other move left, she said, "Thank you." A pause. "You did the work, Madison. I just helped it go where it needed to go." "That's not nothing," Voss said. "It's not, but this one was yours." She hung up. Jackson had been sitting across from her through the whole call, reading her face the way he always did, filling in the side of the conversation he couldn't hear from the expressions she couldn't quite control. "Statement from the department?" he said. "This afternoon. They're confirming the policy dialogue publicly." He sat back. Something passed through his face, not surprise, because he'd been reading situations correctly for 30 years. And he had seen this one heading here since the conference room, but something that was closer to the particular satisfaction of watching something inevitable arrive on schedule. "They couldn't stay quiet after the article," he said. "So now they're running toward what they were running from. Voss says they're trying to get ahead of the story. Already behind it," he said. "They've been behind it since the minute those handcuffs went on." He picked up his coffee, found it empty, put it down. Left to do. Final documents from Voss in 2 weeks. Signing. Then the department has 30 days to initiate the training program and 60 days to complete the first round. She paused. "And Mitchell's hearing. That's still going through the formal process. Says it's likely 3 to 4 weeks out. Will you have to testify?" "Probably. Formally on record." She looked at her father. "That's fine." He looked at her. "I know," he said. "I know it's fine." She almost smiled. "Then why do you look like that?" "Like what?" "Like you're trying to decide whether to offer to come with me." "I wasn't going to offer." "You're 20 years old and a college graduate, and you handled a conference room full of attorneys better than most people twice your age. But you were thinking about it." "I'm always thinking about it," he said. "That doesn't go away. You could be 55 and riding a bike that costs more than some people's houses, and I'd still be thinking about it." She looked at her father and felt that thing again, the hard, clear, decades-built love that wasn't soft. That was more like the frame of a building than the paint on its walls. And the thing underneath, everything that held the shape of the rest of it. "Come to the hearing," she said. "Not because I need you to. I want you there." He looked at her. "Okay," he said. Statement came out at 4:43 p. It was longer than expected, 6 paragraphs, and it said everything Voss had told her it would say, and then one thing more. The final paragraph, called about at 4:51, to make sure Madison had seen, read, "The department recognizes that meaningful accountability requires not only addressing individual conduct, but examining and improving the systems within which officers operate. We are committed to a substantive review of traffic stop training protocols and look forward to working with all stakeholders toward meaningful reform." End of paragraph. Voss read it to her over the phone, then said, "Stakeholders, stakeholder." "That's cold," Madison said. Frank was. "It's bureaucratic. But stakeholder in that context means they're acknowledging your role in the process publicly, in a department statement, which is going to be in every article that covers this story from here forward." A pause. "That's not nothing. Nothing about this has been nothing," Madison said. That evening, the chapter gathered at a garage on the west side of Phoenix. Not formally, nobody called it a meeting. Nobody sent official word. They just showed up the way they showed up for things, the way they had shown up on the highway. By 8 o'clock, there were 30 people there, some with their families, children running around in the parking area, while the adults stood in groups inside and outside talking in the way people talked when something had happened in their community and they were still processing the shape of it. Jackson and Madison arrived together. When Madison walked in, something happened that she hadn't expected. It went quiet, not dramatically, not like a movie moment where a room falls silent and everyone turns at once. Just a gradual rippling stillness that moved through the stillness, that moved through the space as people noticed she was there, that moved from her person until the whole room was holding itself differently. Looking at her, she stood in the doorway with her father behind her and looked back at them. Carl Briggs, who was standing near the center of the room, with a beer he had stopped lifting halfway to his mouth, said, "She was. There she is." That broke it. Everyone started talking again. Several people at once. People coming over. People clapping Jackson on the shoulder. Women she had known since childhood pulling her into hugs, who had ridden through Arizona rain. Because a tracker sent a 12-minute alert shaking her hand or just nodding at her with that particular nod that meant everything and required no words. A woman named Teresa Carl's wife, a retired nurse who was one of the most respectable people Madison had ever known, pulled her aside after the first wave of greetings settled. "How are you?" Teresa said. Not a question exactly, like a statement that was waiting to be corrected or confirmed. "I'm okay," Madison said. "Honestly, I'm really okay." Teresa looked at her the way a retired nurse looked at people with the specific trained attention that had spent decades seeing through the surface of things to what was underneath. "You're going to feel it later," Teresa said, "when everything quiets down and the adrenaline of the process is over. To feel Tuesday night differently than you feel it right now." Madison looked at her. "I know. When that happens," Teresa said, "you call me. You don't just call your dad. You call me." Madison looked at this woman who had been a constant in her life since she was 10 years old, who had bandaged her knee when she fell off her first motorcycle and sat up with her once until 2 in the morning. When something was wrong, she didn't know how to talk to her father about. She said, "I will." Teresa patted her hand once and went back to her husband. Madison stood for a moment near the edge of the room and watched the people around her, the 30 people who had come together on a Tuesday evening, not because anyone told them to, but because it was what you did, because this was what community looked like when it was real, and not just a word people used. She thought about something she had not let herself think about fully until now. She thought about what would have happened if she had not stayed calm. If she had argued when Mitchell told her to step off the bike, if she had raised her voice when the cuffs went on, if she had reacted in any visible and recordable way with the anger she had every right to feel, the stop would have become something different. The body camera footage would have told a different story, not a false one, but an incomplete one, a story that could be cut differently, that could have given Mitchell the narrative he was building before he had a fact to put in it. Control, the hard, trained, exhausting control she had maintained for 40 minutes in the rain, was not passivity. Strategy. It was, in the deepest sense of the word her father used, power. Not the power to destroy something, the power to let the truth be the most visible thing in the frame. Jackson appeared at her elbow. "You okay?" he said. "I keep getting asked that, because the people who love you want to know." She looked at him. "I'm better than okay," she said. "I think I understand something now that I didn't fully understand before Tuesday. That. What you were actually teaching me," she said. And he was, all those years, the writing control, the keeping my documents right, the staying calm. I thought I understood what it was for. I thought it was defensive, like armor." She paused. "Not armor. Is it? It's evidence. Every time you do the right thing correctly, you're building a record that the wrong thing can't erase." Jackson looked at his daughter for a long time. "I never said it that way," he said. "But that's what you meant." He was quiet. He said, "That's what I meant." 2 weeks later, the formal documents were signed. Shavas's office, 9 a.m., a Tuesday again. Different kind of Tuesday than the one before. No rain. Smelled like coffee and clean paper. And the specific neutral, scented air of a place where important things were decided without ceremony. Commissioner Reyes was there. The city attorney was there. Faber was there. Voss was there. Madison was there with her father seated one chair behind her and to the right, close enough to be present, far enough to make clear whose meeting this was. The documents were 12 pages. Voss had been through them 4 times. Madison had been through them twice on her own and twice with Voss, and every word was exactly what they had agreed it would be. Formal reprimand, permanent, non-expungible, documenting 3 specific violations with their exact timestamps, training program commitment, department-wide 80 days. To initiate, 60 days for first-round completion, annual review thereafter, independent third-party development, compliance documented, formal commendation, noted for voluntary disclosure and demonstrated integrity in a situation where silence would have been easier. Madison read through the final page one more time. Then she picked up the pen. She signed her name, Madison Carter, in a clear, steady hand at the bottom of a document that was going to sit in a file at the Phoenix Police Department and in the Oversight Board's records, and in Patricia Voss's office indefinitely, that was going to be referenced when training schedules were reviewed and when similar incidents were investigated, that was going to exist long after the rain and the red lines on her wrists and the sound of 40 engines going silent on a highway shoulder had faded from specific memory into the kind of thing you carry without being able to say exactly where it lives. She put the pen down. Reyes signed on the department's behalf. Signed. Voss countersigned as counsel. And that was it. No applause, no dramatic moment, just paper and ink and a Tuesday morning in a room that smelled like coffee and the specific quiet weight of something becoming permanent. Outside on the sidewalk, Voss shook Madison's hand with both of hers. Voss said, "It's done," Madison agreed. "The training program coordinator will reach out within the month. I'd like you to be available for a consultation if they ask." Have to. It's not part of the agreement, but your perspective on the experience would strengthen what they build. Madison said, "Absolutely yes." Voss looked at her for a moment. In 19 years of civil rights law, she had learned to read the aftermath of a case in the faces of the people who had lived through it. Some people came out of these processes hollowed, emptied by the grind of it, diminished by having to fight for something that should never have required fighting for. Some came out hardened, sealed off, the fight having closed something in them that would take a long time to reopen. Madison Carter, standing on the sidewalk outside Voss's building on a clear Tuesday morning, looked like neither. He was. She looked like someone who had walked through something and come out the other side, still completely herself. Didn't say that out loud. She wasn't built for that kind of statement. She thought it and she held on to it because in 19 years it was not the most common thing she saw. "Call me if anything comes up," Voss said. "I will." They parted. Madison and her father walked to the truck. He drove. She sat in the passenger seat and watched the city move past the window, the streets she had grown up on, the same streets she had driven home through after the conference room, the same city that had been the same city all along, while all of this was happening inside it. "Mitchell's hearing is 3 weeks out," she said. "I know, I'm ready for it." "I know that too." She looked at him. "Happens after." He glanced at her. "After the hearing?" "All of it. After the training program starts, and the reprimand is filed, and the hearing is done, and everything goes back to being ordinary." Jackson drove for a moment without answering. He changed lanes. He took the route that went past the neighborhood where he had grown up, where his father had raised him, where a man had gone to a plant in Tucson for 43 years and kept everything in writing, and eventually got what he had earned. "Right," he said. "That's what happens after. You go back to your life. You work. You do the things you do. And somewhere, a policy document sits in a file, and a training coordinator builds a curriculum, and a reprimand goes into a permanent record, and a young officer named Brooks goes to work every morning a little more certain of who he wants to be." He paused. "You don't see most of it. It happens without you watching. It happens because of Tuesday." She looked at the streets moving past. "That's enough," she said. "That's actually enough." He drove. 3 weeks later, Madison Carter walked into a formal hearing room and told the truth in sequence, the way she had been taught, the way she had practiced, at the beginning and ending at the end, and leaving nothing out. She did it in a steady voice with her hands flat on the table in front of her, and her father 2 rows behind her in the gallery. The body camera footage was played in full. The tow truck timestamp was entered into the record. His voluntary statement was read into the record. Carl Briggs's video was entered into the record. Ryan Mitchell, sitting across the room with Gerald Faber beside him, watched the footage of himself laughing when a girl in the rain asked to call her father. He watched it the way a man watches something he cannot take back without flinching. It's because flinching would be too honest about what he felt, but without stillness either, because stillness required a kind of conviction he had discovered over the past month that he did not have. The hearing took 4 hours. The outcome was not a surprise to anyone who had been paying attention. Mitchell received a 30-day suspension without a formal reprimand that was exactly as permanent as the signed agreement specified, and a mandatory return to full bias training before reinstatement. The panel noted specifically in their findings that the premature tow dispatch, the denial of the phone call request, and the officer's own admitted verbal statement, the one Brooks had written down verbatim, constituted a pattern of conduct that was inconsistent with both department policy and constitutional standards. Pattern, not mistake, not lapse. That word was going to be in the record for as long as the record existed. Madison heard it and wrote it down on the small notepad she had brought. Not because she needed to, because everything was being recorded and she had Voss beside her who would send her a complete transcript by morning. She wrote it down because she wanted to hold the pen in her hand when the word was said. The physical act of writing it, to be part of how she remembered this moment. Patterns. Afterward, in the hallway outside the hearing room, Voss touched her shoulder once and said, "That's a strong finding." And he was. That language is going to matter in how the training program is framed. "Oh," Madison said. "You did well in there. I told the truth." That was enough. Jackson was waiting near the elevator. He had kept himself out of the formal proceedings. His presence in the gallery had been quiet and complete, the same 8 feet of distant stillness he had maintained on the highway. And he had not spoken to anyone in that room except to answer when the panel asked him to confirm his name for the record. He looked at his daughter when she came toward him. He said, "Pattern," she said. He looked at her. "They used the word pattern," she said, "in the formal findings." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Your grandfather would have appreciated that." She thought about a man who had gone to a plant in Tucson for 43 years, who had kept showing up, who had made sure everything was in writing, who had waited for someone to look at the records. "Yeah," she said, "he would have." They took the elevator down. They walked out of the building into the clear Phoenix afternoon, into the particular quality of light that the desert had in October, sharp and clean and gold, the kind of light that made everything look like it was in the best possible focus. Madison's Ducati was parked at her father's house. She had ridden it that morning, not to the hearing, because she had wanted to arrive in the truck with her father, but in the early morning before the hearing, on the back roads she knew, in that particular pre-dawn quiet, when the road was just road. She had checked the tires, checked the mirrors, checked the controls, the way she always did. She had ridden for 45 minutes with no destination in mind, just moving, just these machine under her, and the road ahead, and the enormous Arizona sky, turning from black to gray to the first edge of orange above the mountains. She had thought about 12 minutes. Always 12 minutes, the number the tracker had needed. The number that had changed everything. The number that was the exact distance between being alone in the rain, with handcuffs on her wrists, and having her father on his way. 12 minutes was such a small number. 12 minutes was nothing the time it took to make a cup of coffee, to read a short article, to ride 3 miles on an open highway. 12 minutes was the difference between a story that ended at the side of the road and one that became permanent record, training curriculum, formal finding, policy change. 12 minutes. She had turned the Ducati toward home and let the engine settle into that deep, precise hum. And she had thought about what Teresa had told her, "You're going to feel it later." Everything quiets down, and she had realized, at 50 miles an hour, with the desert waking up around her, that she was already feeling it. Not with the sharp edge of anger or the specific ache of injustice, but with something steadier and more complicated. The feeling of having been tested in a particular way and having been exactly who she needed to be. She didn't let herself feel proud of it, because pride wasn't quite the right word. Pride was about yourself. This was about something larger than herself, about her father's teaching and her grandfather record keeping, and Brooks's shaking voice on a phone call, and Carl Briggs's camera mounted on a flat handlebar a quarter-mile back on a rainy highway shoulder. This had never been only about her. It had been about what happened when people were exactly who they said they were, at exactly the moment it cost something to be it. And now, walking out of a hearing building into October light with her father beside her, she felt the shape of it settle, the full shape, permanent shape. Not the story of what happened to her on a Tuesday in the rain. The story of what the Tuesday in the rain became. Jackson stopped at the truck and looked at her. "Hungry?" he said. "Yes." I'll make something. I'll ride home, she said. I'll meet you there. He looked at her. You don't have the bike. I'll Uber to your house, get the bike, ride it back to mine. She looked at him. He understood. He always understood. Call me when you stop, he said. I know, Dad. She watched him get in the truck. She watched him pull out of the parking lot and drive away, this gray-haired, broad-shouldered, quiet man who had spent 20 years teaching her everything that mattered by being it himself, who had never once in her life told her what to think, only shown her how to think, who had put her on a motorcycle before he put her in a car, because the motorcycle told the truth. She called the Uber. She stood on the sidewalk in the October afternoon and waited, and she thought about the red Ducati sitting patient in her father's garage, and the long road home, and the way the desert looked in this particular light gold and sharp and impossibly clear. She got to the garage. She checked the bike over. Mirrors, controls, everything exactly where it was supposed to be. Put on her helmet. She started the engine, and Madison Carter, daughter of Jackson Carter, 20 years old and complete in the knowledge and where she came from and what she was built to do, in the moments that cost something, leaned into the first curve of the road home and rode not away from what had happened, but forward from it, carrying it the only way it could be carried, as the kind of truth that once recorded never disappears, and the kind of strength that chooses to build what it could have chosen to break.